The mystery of the first astronaut. Did a spaceflight really happen in 1943? Hey everyone, if you're into jaw-dropping stories, historical mysteries, and secrets that could rewrite what we think we know, this one's for you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments at the end. I'm dying to hear what you think about this wild tale. Picture this. It's 1990, the Cold War is finally cooling off, and out of nowhere, Western newspapers drop a bombshell. An elderly German man, a former Luftwaffe pilot, steps forward with a claim so wild it sounds like something out of a sci-fi flick. He says he was the first astronaut in history. And get this, the first manned spaceflight happened way back in 1943, smack in the middle of World War II. Yeah, you heard that right. Not 1961 with Yuri Gagarin, but 18 years earlier. Sounds like a prank, doesn't it? But what if it's not? What if Nazi Germany, the same country that built the infamous V-2 rocket, pulled off a secret mission to send a human into space? Could they have beaten the US and the Soviets to the cosmic punch by decades? This story is like a puzzle with half the pieces missing, and it's got me hooked. So let's unpack it piece by piece and figure out if there's any truth to this mind-blowing claim. We'll dig into the history, the tech, and even the economics of it all to see if this could have actually happened. Buckle up because this is going to be a wild ride. In 1990, when most people thought the history of spaceflight was set in stone, Yuri Gagarin, as the first man in space, April 12, 1961, a retired German pilot came out of nowhere with a story that turned everything upside down. He claimed that back in 1943, he took part in a top-secret Nazi program and flew a rocket into space. Not just any rocket, but one launched from Piemont, Germany's hush-hush rocket testing ground. But instead of fame or even a footnote in history, this guy says he ended up locked away in a psychiatric hospital in East Germany. The authorities there thought his tales of spaceflight were the ravings of a madman. Why didn't anyone believe him? Well, for starters, 1943 was a brutal year in World War II. Germany was fighting on multiple fronts, resources were stretched thin, and the idea of diverting money and manpower to a space program sounds insane. Plus, the official story of space exploration doesn't start until the 1960s. But what if there's more to it? What if newly opened East German intelligence archives from the Stasi, the secret police, hold clues that back up this guy's story? When I first heard about this, I thought, no way, this has to be a hoax. But the deeper I dug, the more I started to wonder. Let's head to Piemont and see what was cooking in Nazi Germany's rocket labs. To get to the bottom of this, we need to travel back to the 1940s to a small coastal town in Germany called Piemont. This was no ordinary place. It was the nerve center of Nazi Germany's rocket program, where brilliant minds like Wernher von Braun were building the future. You've probably heard of the V-2 rocket, officially called the A-4. It was the world's first ballistic missile, capable of reaching altitudes over 100 kilometers. For context, 100 kilometers is known as the Kármán line, the internationally recognized boundary of space. That's right, the V-2 was already knocking on the door of outer space back in the 1940s. But the V-2 was just the beginning. When Soviet troops rolled into Piemont in 1945, they were blown away by what they found. Among the captured documents and equipment were plans for something even crazier, the A-9 and A-10 rockets. These were two-stage rockets designed to go way beyond the V-2. The A-9, the second stage, was a winged version of the V-2 with a sealed cockpit for a pilot. Yup, a cockpit, meaning the Nazis were at least thinking about sending a human into space. Soviet aircraft designer Viktor Bokovitinov, one of the sharpest minds of his time, couldn't believe his eyes. He wrote that the Germans had built rocket engines so powerful they seemed impossible for a country fighting a losing war. So how'd they pull it off? To answer that, we need to look at the economics and the sheer determination behind Nazi Germany's rocket program. The economic angle. How did Germany bankroll this? In the 1940s, Germany's economy was a mess. The war was draining everything. Millions of tons of steel, coal, and fuel went to tanks, planes, and guns. Yet, Hitler and his regime were obsessed with wonder weapons that could turn the tide of the war. The V program, short for Vergeltungswaffe or Weapons of Vengeance, was a top priority. Historians estimate that Germany spent around 2 billion Reichsmarks on the V2 program alone. In today's dollars, that's roughly 20 billion bucks. For perspective, the Manhattan Project, which built the atomic bomb, cost the US about $2 billion. So, Germany was pouring Manhattan-level cash into its rockets. How did they afford it? Well, Nazi Germany leaned heavily on forced labor. Thousands of prisoners from concentration camps worked in brutal conditions at Peenemünde and the rocket factories. It's a grim reality, but it allowed the Nazis to keep production moving despite the war's strain. Economically, this gave them the ability to push ambitious projects like the A9/A10, even when their backs were against the wall. So, if the V2 could already reach space, what was stopping the Germans from taking the next step and putting a person on board? Let's talk about the project that might hold the key, the America rocket. By 1941, the engineers at Peenemünde were dreaming big. They started working on a two-stage rocket called the A9/A10, nicknamed the America rocket. The goal? To hit the east coast of the United States, specifically New York City, from across the Atlantic. The plan was to launch a rocket from Europe, send it on a suborbital trajectory, meaning it would climb above 100 kilometers into space, and then guide it to its target. The pilot inside a sealed cockpit would steer the rocket, then eject over the Atlantic Ocean, where a German U-boat would pick them up. Crazy, right? This wasn't just a pipe dream. Documents show that by 1944, the Germans were testing the A9, the second stage of this system. During these tests, the rocket reached an altitude of 188 kilometers, nearly double the Kármán line. By today's standards, anyone on board would absolutely be considered an astronaut. But was there actually a pilot? Officially, the tests were unmanned, but the story of that German pilot and some intriguing clues suggest otherwise. Here's where things get wild. In December 1944, a massive explosion rocked the outskirts of New York City. A wealthy farm, complete with barns and warehouses, was reduced to a giant crater. Nearby buildings went up in flames. At first, the military thought it might have been a huge bomb dropped from a plane. But no unknown aircraft were spotted, and the debris at the site didn't look like any bomb they knew. Then, more explosions hit. One in New York Harbor, another in the Bay, each leaving a massive crater. U.S. intelligence started to suspect these were no ordinary attacks. Could they be the work of German rockets? And there's more. In November 1944, the U.S. Coast Guard took down a German sabotage team codenamed Elster. Among their gear, a powerful portable radio beacon, exactly the kind of device you'd use to guide a rocket to its target. Soon after, another German saboteur was captured and spilled the beans. His team was sent to direct intercontinental rockets at key targets in New York. Suddenly, those weapons of vengeance the Nazis bragged about didn't seem like empty propaganda. Now, let's get to the juiciest part of this story. Operation Elster and a pilot named Rudolf Schroeder. According to some sources, Schroeder was the guy who strapped into an A9/A10 rocket on January 24, 1945, for a daring suborbital flight. The mission? To strike New York. But something went wrong. As the rocket climbed into the upper atmosphere, it caught fire, veered off course, and crashed into the Atlantic. Schroeder's fate remains unknown. Did he eject? Did he perish? Or was he even on board? Here's another twist. Otto Skorzeny, the infamous Nazi commando who pulled off the daring rescue of Mussolini, reportedly recruited over 100 pilots for the America project. These weren't kamikaze missions. Each pilot was supposed to guide the rocket, eject over the ocean, and be picked up by U-boat. Speaking of U-boats, from late 1944 to early 1945, The U.S. Navy was hunting German submarines off the East Coast in a massive operation called Teardrop. Why? Because they kept finding subs carrying teams with radio beacons. Exactly what you need to guide rockets across the ocean. If the Nazis didn't have intercontinental rockets, why go to all this trouble? The answer seems obvious. Those sabotage teams were there to guide something. And records suggest at least 7 mysterious strikes hit New York during this period. Coincidence? I don't think so. So, why isn't this story in every history book? A few reasons. First, Nazi Germany lost the war, and a lot of their records were either destroyed or buried in classified archives. Second, neither the US nor the Soviet Union had any interest in giving the Nazis credit for anything, especially during the Cold War space race. Both sides wanted to claim the title of first in space. Third, the German pilot's story might have been dismissed as crazy talk, especially after years in an East German mental hospital. There's also the fact that in the 1940s, the idea of space wasn't clearly defined. The Kármán line wasn't an official boundary until later, and suborbital flights, like the ones American astronauts Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom made on the Mercury program in 1961, were seen as experiments, not real space flights. So, even if the Nazis pulled off a manned suborbital flight, it might not have been recognized as a space mission at the time. But I can't shake the feeling that there's something here. The technology existed. The motivation was there. And the clues, those explosions, those sabotage teams, those pilot cockpits keep piling up. Could Rudolf Schroeder, or someone like him, have been the first human to see Earth from space? Let's take a step back and look at this from an economic angle. Could Nazi Germany, in the middle of a losing war, really afford to build a manned space rocket? Surprisingly, the answer is yes. As I mentioned, the V2 program cost about $20 billion in today's money. That's on par with some of the biggest tech projects in history. And Germany's war machine, while stretched thin, was incredibly efficient. They had the brain power, guys like Wernher von Braun, who later helped NASA land on the moon, and they had forced labor to keep costs down. Compare that to today's space industry. In 2025, companies like SpaceX spend billions on reusable rockets. A single Falcon 9 launch costs around $90 million. Back in the 1940s, the Nazis were spending comparable sums, adjusted for inflation, on a project that was decades ahead of its time. Sure, they didn't have modern life support systems, but a suborbital flight only lasts a few minutes. A sealed cockpit and a parachute? That was well within their capabilities. And here's a fun fact. After the war, both the US and the Soviet Union tested captured V2 rockets. In 1946, the US launched one from White Sands, New Mexico, and it hit 105 kilometers, snapping a photo of Earth along the way. A year later, the Soviets did the same from Kapustin Yar, easily clearing 100 kilometers. These tests proved the Nazi rockets could reach space. Add a pilot's cockpit, and you've got yourself a manned space flight. This story is like a detective novel with no ending. Did Nazi Germany send a pilot into space in 1943? Was Rudolf Schroeder the first astronaut? Or is this all a mix of propaganda, half-truths, and wishful thinking? I lean toward believing it's possible. The Nazis had the tech, the money, and the motive. But without hard proof, like declassified documents or a first-hand account, we're left guessing. So what do you think? Drop a comment below and let me know. Do you buy the idea that Nazi Germany beat everyone to space? Got any theories or facts to add? And hey, don't forget to subscribe for more crazy stories like this one. Let's keep digging into history's mysteries together.